Good afternoon, board members. I am Jeff Tumlin, Director of Transportation, and we have been very busy since we last talked. So let me go through a whole bunch of items that we should update you on. First is we're expecting sometime this afternoon that Supervisor Peskin will introduce a charter amendment at the Board of Supervisors, a ballot measure to be placed on the November ballot that would limit the SFMTA Board's sole authority to establish fares. Last we heard there were still details to be resolved with that amendment, and so we'll provide you with a detailed memo on the topic after it has been filed, presumably today, and we are able to review the final copy. What else do we have? We have also been spending a lot of time on the budget. As you know, the current public health crisis has turned into a dramatic and deep fiscal crisis. We've been able to track revenues to the agency. Most of our own sources of revenue are down between 75 to 100%. And we're now starting to get more detailed information about the state of the general fund and getting ongoing updates about how much our general fund contribution to the agency will be cut as a result of losses to the general fund, which is dependent, as you know, on sources of revenue like hotel tax, which is down dramatically. So we are expecting to be submitting an interim budget along with other city departments to the Board of Supervisors on June 1st. Final budget will be submitted to the Board of Supervisors on August 1st. And in order to get to August 1st, we will be coming back to all of you, the SFMTA Board, on June 16th with proposed revisions to our budget that reflect whatever are then the latest estimates from the Controller's Office on the impacts to the general fund. We'll also be able to update our own projections. Of course, shelter in place continues to be extended, and that continues to have a deep negative impact on our parking fees, our transit fares, and most of our other sources of revenue. In the meantime, we've continued to make deep and painful cuts at the agency in order to save money. We have basically eliminated all non-essential unscheduled overtime, and we've put a hold on all non-essential hiring. This is saving us about $1.5 million a week compared to pre-COVID levels. We're also either canceling or halting extensions of all non-essential contracts. That has saved us at least $1 million and will likely save us more as more and more contracts come up for renewal. Many of these contracts are for services that are deeply loved by our staff, and under normal circumstances we would want to continue, like the Back First program for our bus operators. But canceling these at this time is going to be essential for us to be able to make it through this crisis without much more painful cuts, including to our workforce. We're also putting a hold on all discretionary travel, non-mission critical training, basically everything that we can cut that doesn't get in the way of us being able to directly deliver essential services to the public. On the good news side, we are positioning ourselves to receive money from the federal stimulus. And in order to allow that to happen, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission is establishing a Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force to look at ways of distributing the second tranche of federal funding in ways that are most equitable across the 26 different transit agencies, but also to try to take some leadership on making the 26 transit agencies in the Bay Area more seamless from a user perspective. This is quite different than the approach that Assemblymember Chu was taking in the seamless transit bill that he was initially proposing, but that's been set aside by the state legislature in order to allow them to focus on COVID. So we're trying to lead on this at an agency level, including doing some work with collectively among the general managers of many transit agencies in order to figure out how can we take a more customer-oriented approach and work together without being forced to do so by the state government? So one of the efforts of that is this Blue Ribbon Recovery Task Force. Our first meeting will be on May 29th. I will be sitting on that task force along with the general managers of the larger transit operators, MTC commissioners, and a variety of stakeholders throughout the region. For the first tranche of funding coming from the CARES Act that was passed on March 27th, we're expecting the SFMTA to receive approximately $197 million. This is hugely helpful and allows us to close out this fiscal year without layoffs, which we are deeply, deeply indebted to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi for her strong leadership in making that happen, along with advocates from all over the country who helped push that funding all the way to final approval in Congress. In addition to the CARES Act, as you probably know, the House is currently debating the second potential tranche of federal stimulus funding called the HEROES Act. And the current measure as of this week includes another over $15 billion of funding for transit relief. I think there's an increasing recognition in Washington, certainly here in the San Francisco Bay Area, that the success of public transit is essential for the overall economic recovery of all of our metropolitan regions. If essential workers can't get to work, the recovery can't happen. And if essential workers are all expected to get in their cars and drive to work, the transportation system simply can't handle that. And we're already seeing those problems in parts of East Asia. And we'll talk a little bit more later in this presentation about our efforts to get ahead of the congestion problems. Moving on to Vision Zero, we did have one fatality in April. It was a single vehicle crash. Vehicle ran off the road on April 21st on the south slope of Potrero Hill. That crash is still under investigation by SFPD, but in the meanwhile, Public Works and we have implemented some temporary barricades and other quick response efforts to try to make sure that that never happens again. Key thing that we want to update you on is the slow streets work that SFMTA has been working on since the middle of last month. As I'm sure all of you know by now, in response to the shutting down of 3/4 of Muni transit lines, the SFMTA stepped forward to try to identify corridors that would allow more San Franciscans to feel safe walking or biking to transit, or walking or biking all the way to their essential jobs. We started off with a very modest effort focused on neighborhoods that had lost the most transit service, specifically the Sunset District and Page Street in portions of the Western Addition and Lower Haight. Our initial efforts, despite the stumbles that we had early on around our rush to move things forward and our lack of communication, those efforts have been wildly successful. In fact, to the extent that we're getting complaints, all of those complaints are basically complaints about why can't we have this in my neighborhood and why can't you move more quickly? So as of May 8, we had 15 miles of slow streets, and we expect once our phase 2 planning is complete, that we'll have an additional 35 miles. We're soliciting input now for phase 3 and hoping to have slow streets scattered throughout the city. I should remind all of you that slow streets are very much a temporary experimental pilot program using very quickly installed and very easily removable materials. We are experimenting and changing things around in real time as we learn additional information. And all of our work is being coordinated through the city's Emergency Operations Center, including collaboration with both police and fire, who have helped us make a lot of changes to the routes as we've gone along. We have some update on micromobility. Lime has been acquired by Jump, which is a product of Uber. Lime stopped operating scooters in March due to the COVID crisis, but they're now actually, as of yesterday, starting to bring back a limited amount of scooter service. Meanwhile, Spin, which had been our only operator for quite some time, has done a lot of work in order to make itself useful service during the COVID crisis, including offering deep discounts for essential workers to join, expanding its fleet, and expanding its geofence to cover nearly the entire city. We continue to be in litigation with Lyft, which operates Bay Wheels, which is wanting to establish a monopoly for bike share service in San Francisco. But meanwhile, they are working on rapidly expanding the availability of electric assist bikes, shared electric assist bikes throughout San Francisco. So hopefully both Spin and Bay Wheels and Lime will be offering increased availability of micromobility services, and that will work very well with our gradual expansion of the Slow Streets program. I should also note that we are looking at some additional quick build bikeway improvements, including a new bikeway on Fell Street between Baker and Stanton in order to offload some of the pressure from the Panhandle bikeway. The Panhandle path is experiencing higher level utilization than we have ever seen since we've been collecting data, as more and more people are using our slow streets and are taking advantage of walking, biking, skateboarding, and scootering in order to stay fit during the COVID crisis. A couple of other updates. The most recent, or the health directive earlier this month, authorized new construction to get moving again. And so we have been taking advantage of that to take care of some deferred maintenance in the Muni Metro subway, taking advantage of the fact that trains are not operating there. We're catching up on some of that work, as well as completing the West Portal crossover that former Director Malcolm Heineke had advocated for. We should be able to complete the West Portal crossover in time for the restart of rail service, allowing us to be able to potentially offer 3-car shuttles in the subway between West Portal and Embarcadero stations. We're also moving forward rapidly on the Van Ness Improvement Project. The lack of traffic on Van Ness Avenue has been able to allow the crews to accelerate the sewer and water work that has been the source of so much of the disruption on that street. That work is continuing quickly, and it means that we'll be able to start the SFMTA portion of that project, the bus rapid transit portion, starting this spring. I'll remind you all that while the SFMTA is in the lead on the BRT project, none of our work has actually started yet, the work for creating the bus rapid transit line. So we're very much looking forward to that work getting moving. Many of you also know about the Caltrans 101 deck replacement at Alamany. Caltrans replaced the entire bridge deck of 101, and as they have done before, thanks to the innovative contract structure that offered significant bonus for the contractor to finish early, that project happened extraordinarily quickly. And it happened several months ahead of schedule, taking advantage of the fact that traffic is so light right now. So we're very happy with our partners at Caltrans and their contractors for taking care of that critical project so quickly. We're also moving forward on the Geary Rapid project, and over Memorial Day weekend, this coming weekend, we'll be demolishing the pedestrian bridge at Geary and Steiner. That will cause a little bit of disruption. As most of you know, that pedestrian bridge is very steep. It does not meet the Americans with Disabilities Act standards. And so instead, we will be replacing it with an at-grade standard crossing, helping to turn that portion of Geary Boulevard back into more like a street than the expressway that it was conceived of in the 1950s. We're also moving forward rapidly with the El Terraval project. That will continue to create some disruption, but in the end will result in a far higher quality of service as well as better speed and reliability on the El Terraval. I also wanted to let you know that we have been carefully watching how other cities around the world have been responding to COVID since really the very beginning of the crisis back in January. We had seen that the increase in COVID transmission tracked very well by timeline to what we were experiencing, as well as what the impacts would be on the transportation system. We are now following the cities that have been most successful in crushing the curve and where transportation, and particularly public transit, is leading in the recovery effort. And though the cities that we're most inspired by for transit have been Seoul and Taipei. So 2 weeks ago, our Departmental Operations Center met with all of their equivalents, the city of Taipei in Taiwan, including a surprise visit from the mayor of Taipei. And we learned a lot, both about their vision as well as all of their operational details of what they're doing in order to position transit to be a primary force in reopening the economy, including realizing that 6 feet of social distancing at a certain point simply does not work on public transit. And so learning from them about how they had done things like rigidly enforcing the facial covering standards, doing very strong contact tracing, doing very strong testing of their operators, doing temperature checking of the members of the public, including having thermal scanners at key rail stations. All of that has allowed them to analyze the risk factors, the mitigation factors, the time factors on public transit, and compare that against the value of the activity, allowing them to create the case that full restoration of transit service was a relatively low risk and extremely high return activity. Finally, I would just like to close with some gratitude. Gratitude to the entire SFMTA staff who've continued to work excessive hours. As all of you know, I've spent my entire career in the private sector, and I have never seen harder working, more skilled people than I'm seeing throughout the entirety of the SFMTA. This team has come together beautifully during this crisis, knowing that the public is completely dependent upon what we do, and we need to get ahead of the problems that are facing us. Their strong effort has meant that the SFMTA has had one of the lowest COVID transmission rates of transit or transportation agencies in the country. We've not had a COVID positive case in over 2.5 weeks now, and our total COVID positive cases stands at 12, which for 6,000 employees, while it's too many, it is a very low rate, particularly for frontline workers compared to what we've seen from other agencies around the country. This is due to the fact that all of our workforce are following the guidance from the Department of Public Health and are taking care of themselves, each other, and their families in order to reduce transmission. And we are committed to helping our staff continue to maintain this strong health record. I'm also grateful, of course, to now former Director Rupke for her leadership, her compassion, her practicality, and the deep experience she was able to lend to this board to help us understand the practical needs of people with disabilities, particularly people navigating our transit system in wheelchairs. Her experience will be deeply missed. And finally, to Senator Torres, another thank you to you as well. Your advice from deep experience, the way you bring both a sense of fairness and justice, but also reasonableness to your leadership at the board. I can't think of anyone better than you to help the UC Board of Regents also get through this deep financial crisis with a sense of fairness. So thank you again for your service. You are inspiration to me. And with that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Director. I do want to say the echo, but anyway, I do want to say thank you to you and the staff for all the hard work during this really difficult time, and just all the efforts that you've made to keep everyone safe and to keep our entire population safe. So I just wanted to reiterate that at the end of your comments. At this point, I'm going to allow directors to ask questions of your report, and then I'll open up to public comment so that maybe some of the questions that the board members ask might answer some of the questions that board members are going to be talking about. So Dr. Brinkman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Director Tumlin, what you said at the end of your director's report, before, of course, thanking Directors Rupke and Torres, I've been so impressed with how the staff has managed to work through so many issues on this. And I think it's sort of like the duck analogy where it looks all serene on top of the water, but underneath they're paddling furiously because we can't see everybody and people aren't working together and we don't get that glimpse of it. It's really impressive what they've managed to do. And I'm a huge open streets proponent, but what I've seen on Page Street and Lake Street has just taken my breath away with how quickly people have come out to enjoy those streets. So I just want to say thank you to all the staff. I'm sure you and everyone in the agency are working so hard. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean that we don't notice it and we don't appreciate it. So thank you. And to all the agency staff that's listening, thank you so much. I know the challenges you're dealing with working remotely, childcare at home, uncertain financial times all around us with your partners, with your spouses and your families. So thank you all very much. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. Director Heminger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff, a question on the next wave of transit funding that might be coming from Washington. My understanding is, in addition to the total dollar amount being about $10 billion smaller, the formula that's under consideration and that I believe the House passed for allocating those funds around the country is quite a bit less favorable to the Bay Area, maybe in part to make up for the fact that New York didn't do too well in the first one. Can you just give us a sense of where that issue is and whether we might be able to make some progress on it?
I think that's exactly right. So the previous formula did quite well by the Bay Area, and New York, which has a huge share of the entire country's transit ridership, did comparably worse. And so I think the attempt is to make up for some of that problem while also helping all of the rest of us continue to survive in fiscal year 2021. So we've got, we will get some money, probably about 30% of our allocation will be available for the next fiscal year, but that will not get us through without very deep cuts to the transportation system sometime in the coming fiscal year.
Okay. Does that conclude your questions, Director Heminger?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Director Torres.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Jeff. I was honored to serve on the search committee with Steve and Amanda, the chair, when we recommended you to the full board. And that's the decision I have never regretted. You have fulfilled beyond expectations the challenges that are there. But I most admire the fact that you get out of your office and you connect with the people who are helping and making the sacrifices to run this agency and transit in San Francisco. That's a very important part of leadership. Always reach out to those people who are your constituents, who are your employees, to let them know that you're a stakeholder too, and you're in this with them together. I think that's very, very commendable. But I can assure you, apparently I was cited immediately after the announcement on the UC Region position by your staff, who wants me to help them with UCSF and their planning issues. So my work is never done for this agency, and now in a new role as Region. So we're having a meeting this Friday to discuss just how I can be of help to the staff. But again, my hat's off to the entire staff of this agency. They are committed. They are making tremendous sacrifices, especially our drivers and the constant harassment they're getting from people who don't want to put on their masks, who don't want to abide by these orders and these provisions. So good luck, Jeff, and I hope to see you soon. And I'm sure I will be talking to you as a regent on transportation issues.
Great, thank you. Director Eakin.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to comment as well on the Slow Streets program and agree with Director Brinkman. It's really just been remarkable how transformative these couple of sandwich boards and cones and barriers and signs have been to neighborhoods. And I also just wanted to echo that I think there's a lot more appetite. I think we're surprised by how much more appetite there is for these once people have kind of gotten a feel for them. And I just know that in Los Angeles, they're taking a slightly different approach. They are sort of asking communities to step up and apply to host a slow street, essentially, and that in 1 week of that application, they've gotten 120 applications from communities for slow streets. And so I hope that we can find some way to allow communities and neighborhoods to express where they have preference for more of these slow streets, because I think there's a lot of excitement and interest out there.
So for anyone wanting to express interest in slow streets, please go to sfmta.com/COVID and click on the link for slow streets. We are still accepting requests for phase 3 of our experiments and eagerly looking forward to making sure that we are trying this in all corners of the city, particularly the corners in the city that have the least access to public parks and that are farthest from essential services like grocery stores and pharmacies. So we're also needing to recognize that for some neighborhoods, particularly the Tenderloin, we need to do more than simply throw out some sandwich boards, that it's important for us to collaborate with community-based organizations to make sure that social services are included in the Slow Streets work and that there's a higher level of management given the great need in neighborhoods such as the Tenderloin. So those places are unfortunately taking us a little bit longer because we're needing to do the additional collaboration that's necessary to make sure that they will be successful.
Great. Director Eakin, did you have anything else? If not, I will just close out. I'm thrilled to see that you are accepting more slow streets. There's a lot of interest I hear every single day. And I think I've seen that North Beach Business Association voted to close a portion of their street. I know Hayes Valley is similarly working. So I'm hoping that, do those people then, should they go online and apply at the slow streets that you mentioned, Jeff, or what's Director Tumlin, what's the best process for people who have expressed that interest through neighborhood groups?
So we're getting more requests than we possibly have the capacity to deliver. So another thing that is effective, in addition to putting the request on our website, which all goes into a big request file, working through neighborhood associations and through your Board of Supervisor office, that is a really helpful way to allow us to prioritize our limited resources and make sure that we're delivering in the locations that have the greatest need and that are also the most suitable. So things that we look for are low volume residential streets that are not emergency response routes and where there's not commercial activity that needs truck delivery and so on. We also like a fair amount of consensus. Again, we have limited resources, so it's in our best interest to make sure that we're delivering these streets where they're most welcome.
Great. And then I had a couple other questions. I see that we've been doing, it's great that we've been able to escalate some projects, including Van Ness BRT, which is very important. One of the questions that people have asked me is about our street repaving, and I know that that's not really our function, that's more of a Department of Public Works function, but it came up yesterday, I saw a person on my street who was on a scooter that bit it because the street is terrible. When I ride a bike on these blocks leading down to the core of the Mission, the streets are horrendous. Are we taking advantage as DPW? And granted, I know that's a different agency. Do you have any eyesight into whether or not they're taking advantage of this time to do any sort of work related to the streets. I know we're doing kind of like the Van Ness and the other projects we're talking about, but any specific street repaving work, especially as we talk about slow streets. Some of the obstacles to using the streets are the fact that they are very not well paved. And if you're on a bike or a scooter or in a wheelchair, it's extremely uncomfortable to be on some of these streets.
Yes, so DPW is accelerating their paving program again. We are coordinating closely with them. In fact, that has been another analytical step in our selection of slow streets corridors, is we are wanting to put them on corridors that are not about to get repaved. So some of the moving around of corridors that we've done has been a result of coordination with DPW.
Great. And then the other question I had, you mentioned this MTC task force for recovery, and then you talked about for the next tranche of money, looking at how it's done equitably. And I just wanted to make sure that however it's going to be done, the money is still focusing on the core needs that we have and not on some new program related to working together. I just wasn't clear on that.
Yes, so all the operators have been really clear, like, look, we just need our money. There is an existing SDA formula that works well at divvying it up, and that should be tied to actual financial losses. As you wade into the detail, there's some questions at the margins about, like, should you get, this much money or this much money? And so there'll be some discussion about how tranche 2 gets divvied up, but it'll be mostly directly tied to our actual losses. The task force, however, will continue well beyond when the last of the CARES Act funding is distributed. I'm really focused on how do we establish priorities for transit for the whole region, and how do we help to make the system more seamless from a user perspective, and opening up many questions in that regard. And I think that there's so much that we could do that is relatively low-hanging fruit if we had a good forum for helping to make that happen.
Great. Well, with that, I'm going to open it up to public comment. This is the time for members of the public to have the line open so they may ask questions of the director's report only, and obviously the related comments the directors have questions to the director's report before it.
All right, for members of the public who are watching
question and answer mode.
This meeting by
each question, press 1, then 0.
For members of the public who are watching this meeting via SFG TV who wish to address the board on topics that were discussed by Director Tumlin or subsequently commented on by members of the board, please call 888-808-6929. Then you will dial 9961-164 and then finally 10. And moderator, please let us know if there are members of the public
You
who
have
wish to
2
address.
questions remaining.
All right, so members of the public, when it is your turn to speak, the system will prompt you automatically. And so please give us your name. Your 2 minutes will start when you start talking. First caller, please.
Hi,
Hello?
my name is Zach Carnazes, and yes, am I the first caller?
Yep,
Yes.
Yes, my name is Zach Carnazes, and I'm extremely disturbed with the way that SFMTA is manipulating the COVID-19 pandemic to weaken the drivers' union, to cut back driver contracts and jobs and programs that have helped drivers. Boarding on the back of the bus is helpful for social distancing. As a person who uses a wheelchair on the front of the bus, I do not want all of the public running past me. That doesn't help social distancing for those that are at the highest risk on the front of the bus. And there doesn't seem to be any discussion about reducing the six-figure salaries that administrators and communications people have at SFMTA, or other measures that could be taken to reduce the cost, lowering or canceling expensive construction projects or other things. And it's very, very concerning to see that this is being used and manipulated as an effort to weaken the union, which has always been the goal of SFMTA, or at least it has been for a very long time. I'm very concerned about that. Additionally, when people keep commenting about the work that the previous director did for wheelchair users, I imagine people making those comments are not wheelchair users, and then it's a real slap in the face to those of us who are and who have had to face tremendous discrimination from SFMTA for being in a wheelchair. And I would really ask that people stop making comments like that if you're not a wheelchair user, because it really shows that you're not even listening to us or
30
taking
seconds.
our concerns seriously, and it's extremely hurtful. I really hope that SFMTA will consider other measures instead of punishing contractors and drivers who only make $26 an hour driving unibuses. Very low pay for the extremely hard work that they do and the amount that they have to put themselves at risk during the COVID pandemic, whereas many people in administrative positions do not and earn a lot more money. And there should be things talked about for relocating funds that way if it's needed.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Next speaker, please.
You have 4 questions remaining.
All right, so this is an opportunity to comment on topics raised during the director's report. When you give us your name, we will start your 2 minutes. Next caller.
Hi, this is Eric Roselle. I'm a resident of the Tenderloin and a community organizer. And first, I would just like to thank the Board of Directors and Director Tumlin for your efforts in securing more slow streets in support of that. As a Tenderloin resident of over 15 years, there's a growing need here, a desperate need, to be quite honest, for open space to be provided. And I am a little confused as to why on the most recent map that was provided showing projects that were being considered, why the Tenderloin was deferred to the Tenderloin neighborhood plan, COVID plan. And then when meeting with the COVID plan operators yesterday during a community meeting, they deferred to MTA. So there seems to be this back and forth and uncertainty as to who's going to be assisting Tenderloin CDOs and residents in securing slow streets or projects, community streets, whatever they may be called, since they're not quite the same. But just kind of curious as to who really is overseeing that project and who we as a community can lean into at the MTA to provide support for what's happening here in the community. And that's really all I have to say. So thank you for your time and best wishes.
Thank you. Next speaker, moderator.
And actually, Chair Gordon, if I
You
may.
have 3 questions remaining.
This topic is very dear to my heart. Since the Tenderloin has the highest concentration.
Toronto.
Hold on a second.
Go ahead with Barry. I'll come back.
Sorry.
Yeah, hi, this is Barry, Toronto. I first want to say that these slow streets are a little frustrating because they're not designated before until you come upon it. So it is really behoove you to provide signage the block before to let you know that the street is closed. Because as a cab driver, I drive 2 days a week. I don't do more, even though the business is there, because of to limit my exposure, plus to be focused 11 to 12 hours in order to make money and to serve the public. It takes a lot of energy and motivation. And because of my age and diabetes, I have to limit my exposure. So, and I'm really concerned that our inability to be able to maneuver the streets due to the slow streets is a problem since it's not always marked well until you come upon the street, and that's a problem. And also the traffic has increased. I've noticed from 7 weeks ago when I started back driving again, once or twice a week, that the traffic has increased exponentially, and also it'd be great if you want to make money. You need to get the double parkers on the main muni thoroughfares, especially during the peak hours of, let's say, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. There's a problem with delivery and TNC drivers not pulling over when there's obviously parking. There is lots of parking in certain areas for still because a lot of businesses still aren't open, or they're limited opening. So I think there's an opportunity here to improve the flow of the muni and also to generate some income. I know it's
Time.
not a good place, but anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you. Next speaker, please, moderator.
So next speaker, if you could give us your
You
name and
have
your 2
3
minutes,
questions remaining.
your time will start when you start talking after you give us your name. And this is,
Hi,
go ahead.
Hayden Miller. I just wanted to say that I would encourage you guys to keep expanding the Slow Streets program, and also with the mask and face covering enforcement, work more closely with SFPD to ensure that everybody is wearing a mask, because as some directors have said, the operators are being harassed a lot over it, and it's not fair when really they're coming to work, they're trying to provide a public service, and really the public is just harassing them. So getting more SFPD on the buses to enforce it. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have additional speakers, moderator?
You have 2 questions remaining.
Next speaker, please.
So the next
My
speaker,
name
please
is
give us
Herbert
your name.
Weiner, and I have 2 questions to ask. One is, with further cutbacks in bus routes, bus stops, and services be contemplated, even if this pandemic existed or not? I get the distinct impression there's going to be cutbacks in service that have been contemplated months before. And basically, they're destroying MTA Muni in order to save it. The second thing is, I'm wondering if the closure of streets, or the slow streets, doesn't add to traffic congestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
You have 1 question remaining.
All right, please give us your name, your time will start. Go ahead, give us your name, please.
John, JOHN, I'm not sure if you saw over the weekend, there were dozens of illegally parked cars on Great Highway, Point Lobos Avenue, in the bike lane, and that was very detrimental to cyclists being able to access San Francisco and exercise in a safe manner. The bollards are placed very, very far apart so that cars can easily drive between them. I would encourage MTA to space the bollards more closely together and to increase enforcement in places like that, knowing that by closing the parking lots next to Ocean Beach, which was the correct decision, there will be some desire on the part of motorists to find adjacent locations, whether in Golden Gate Park or in this case in bike lanes. Just make sure through better infrastructure and enforcement that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's our last caller. Is that correct, moderator?
The moderator could let us know if there are additional speakers on the line. Members of the public.
There are no additional speakers.
Thank you.
Moderator,
Director
please
Tumlin?
close. Please close public comment.
So I'd like to address a couple of the comments that speakers rose. First of all, in the Tenderloin, it is, from a traffic safety perspective, it is our highest priority in the city, given the fact that the Tenderloin has the greatest concentration of vulnerable people in San Francisco and some of the highest traffic volume and traffic speed. It also shows up, pretty much every street is on our Vision Zero network. For the Tenderloin Neighborhood Plan, the Healthy Streets Operations Center is the lead for coordinating that planning work. The SFMTA is in a very prominent position in terms of the planning and implementation of that work. So we are coordinating with them directly. Our Vision Zero team is working closely in order to figure out that combination of management and design. We're also learning a lot from the work that we've done on O'Farrell Street and Ellis Street in collaboration with community-based organizations. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, yes, we're quite aware of the parking problems on Great Highway near the Cliff House. just as our muni operators have been hit severely by COVID-related leave, so have our parking control officers, particularly on the weekend. We're expecting this week to get a significant increase in parking control officer availability. That will allow us hopefully to restore a greater amount of parking enforcement on the weekends, and they know to target not only that portion of Great Highway near the Cliff House, but also south near Fort Funston, as well as a few other locations that have created a lot of scofflaw parking.
Thank you, Director. With that, we'll move on to our next item.